The UK is having a moment. Its economy is spluttering, and a global bond sell-off in recent months has sent its borrowing costs rocketing. It's putting the government in an unenviable position. It needs to get the economy motoring again, or risk being pushed into unpopular austerity measures by investors worried about its finances. So what is it doing? And will it be enough? We thought we'd dig in. It's what we do here on Reuters Econ World. Every week, we pick a phrase or buzzword and go deep on the economic principles and ideas driving the biggest news around the world. So this week, it's the UK. I'm your host, Carmel Crimmins, in Dublin. Okay, so before we go any further, I need to make a full confession. I've also been having a moment recently. I've had a bad case of the flu. That's why we didn't have an Econ World podcast last week. I am sorry about that. But we're back with a cracker this week. My colleague Alex Smith is joining me. He's a banks and companies editor, normally based in London. But this week, he's in Davos, helping to cover the World Economic Forum. Welcome, Alex.
Hi, great to be here first time on Econ World.
Well, welcome. We're delighted to have you. Now, so Alex, when it comes to Davos, you're a battle-hardened veteran, right? How long have you been going? How many years have you got under your belt?
I was just trying to count back, and I think the first one I came to was in 2007, so it's a good many years now.
Wow.
And it has changed a bit over the years.
And over the years, you've seen the fortunes of Britain, as with any country, they've waxed and waned. What have people at Davos been saying about the UK this year?
Well, the big story here has really been Trump, and Trump has overshadowed everybody else. But what's been interesting is that around the corridors, you've seen other leaders and finance ministers doing the rounds, and one of those has been the UK Finance Minister Rachel Reeves. Yeah,
it's so interesting. Like the World Economic Forum, or Davos as it's known, it's a key event for any finance minister, right? It's where CEOs and investors gather. It's a golden opportunity to bang the drum for your country. So I suppose no surprises that Rachel Reeves is there this week. What sort of message is she sending out?
Well, her message has been very much about how the recent troubles in the bond markets have not been about Britain. They've not been specific to Britain, but they've been a more general global malaise, and that other G7 countries have also, including the US, have been caught up in a bond market weakness, which has seen a rise in yields, which I think you've talked about a lot before on the pod. But no, it's interesting that she's clearly got a message here to business leaders and CEOs. And what Davos enables finance ministers and others to do is to have some one-on-one meetings in a very much kind of speed dating kind of way.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned like speed dating. I think dating is always an indiscreet game. Have you and the team on the ground there, the Reuters team, have you got any sort of insight as to how her message is being received by CEOs and investors? How's she doing?
I think it's fair to say that investors and business leaders that we've spoken to have they're still keen to understand more about which growth levers the UK can really pull to try and get the economy really motoring again. Obviously, none of the indicators have been good recently, and they've been trying very hard to convince the markets, the bond markets, and international investors, particularly since Britain has left the EU, to come and invest in Britain.
So just to take a step back, can you paint a picture for us about where the UK economy is at, Alex? Like, we all remember that bond turbulence that we saw at the start of the year. What exactly is going on?
Well, the bond market turbulence specific to the UK has been about how British borrowing, basically, and how sustainable Britain's borrowing is. I mean, there's, again, I think you've spoken before about the level of borrowing in the UK.
It's high, yeah.
It's high, and, the government accepts that it's high, and they want to bring it down, but at the same time, they're juggling trying to improve growth. And what they did in the budget last year was to try and stimulate the economy in a way through, well, they didn't raise taxes on individuals. They did increase tax through national insurance payments, on companies. And that obviously provoked a backlash among companies who said,
Right.
we're going to have to pass this cost on, we're going to have to swallow this cost, and that will hit employment. So there's a real juggling act going on here for the government, but also for employers and people actually in Britain's who are looking at what it means for their jobs and what it means for their futures as well.
I mean, it's interesting. I think Rachel Reeves herself has made the point that, there's been global turmoil in the bond market. It hasn't just been the UK, but it did feel for a while there that the UK was in the eye of the storm. It does feel like investors are very focused on the UK. Is there something specific that's got them worried?
Well, I mean, one of the issues which is always talked about is productivity. And one of the things that, all countries are striving to do and all governments are striving to do is to make their workforces more productive.
Yeah.
And the question is, how do you do that? And do you do that through reforms? Do you do that reforms of the labour market? I mean, this government's still in its infancy. I mean, it was only elected last year. It's coming on the back of the pandemic. And, they've tried, or the message has been very much about trying to get things back on track. The Labour government that is currently in, was elected last year is pointed the finger at their predecessors, the Conservatives.
I mean, recent data hasn't been great, right? We saw public borrowing was nearly £18 billion in December, more than double last year's amount. Clearly, rising interest payments on the national debt are driving up the deficit. So it is now on the watch of the current government.
Yeah, and we had a story which was published by Mark Jones this week on Reuters, which looked at how this was the following through into the ratings agencies, and he was looking at scope and how they were questioning what this might mean for Britain's credit rating,
right?
Which is at the moment a very solid one, but that's something that governments are always looking over their shoulder at and wanting to convince the ratings agencies that they deserve the credit ratings they have.
Now, you caught up with Rachel Reeves in Davos. I believe you conducted the interview in your socks, Alex. Is this a first for you?
It is a first for me. I arrived in my big clunky snow boots and was politely asked to remove them before stepping onto some rather smart light carpet in the room which we conducted the interview in.
So I've got to ask you, Alex, the pride of the newsroom is resting on your shoulders. Were the socks matching and were they clean?
I can safely say they were matching and they were clean.
Well done.
They weren't very special, but
we're proud of you.
If I'd known, I'd have got some special socks out.
Okay, let's take a listen to your conversation, Alex.
Last time I interviewed a chancellor, it was in 1997 when Mauritius was Gordon.
Gorgeous.
So there you go.
Oh.
Exactly. Look at this. I'll get straight into it. Do you feel like a prisoner of the bond markets at the moment? How concerned are you about bond vigilantes? And is there any danger that the markets might push you into austerity measures unless they see a clear trajectory on growth? Lots in that question.
Yeah, fine. There is a lot in that question, Alex. So there's undoubtedly been movements in global bond markets this year. I don't think the UK has been the cause of that volatility. And just looking at what's happened year to date, we're in line with our peers. Just looked at bond yields, I think, this morning that we're up slightly more than the US, but less than Germany, for example. So it's not a UK phenomenon. It's not a targeting of the UK. There's stuff going on globally that we all know about and understand. Of course, that does put pressure on public finances in the UK. We've got a large amount of debt and it affects debt servicing costs. We've asked the Independent Office of Budget Responsibility to do a forecast that will be published on March 26th. And at that point, I'll be setting out any changes that are necessary. I don't think we should jump the gun. We're only 3 months into this year, another 2 months before the OBR produce their forecast. So, but I would just say two other things just to finish answering your question. We've got these fiscal rules, get debt down as a share of GDP, pay for day-to-day spending through tax receipts. Those fiscal rules are non-negotiable. And so when we publish that forecast on March 26th, we will meet those fiscal rules. And the second thing I would say, which sort of is where you finished, in the end, to make debt sustainable, we've got to grow the economy. And that's why the number one mission of this government is to grow the economy. I've been setting out plans on planning reform, regulatory reform. Prime Minister Keir Starmer's announced further reforms to the judicial review process to make it easier to build big infrastructure in the UK. Substantial capital markets reform, particularly around pensions, an AI opportunities plan that was published last week to much excitement from some of the tech companies, including some of the US big tech companies. So we are, taking out those barriers that have stopped businesses investing and growing in Britain. Confident we can get those growth numbers up.
I think that's a good. You go further and faster to speed up growth. I mean, in addition to those measures that you've already mentioned, are there others that you can tell us about now?
Let's look at what we've done this week. We've said that we're going to reform the regulatory system. We asked all regulators to tell us what they could do to go further and faster to regulate for growth, not just for risk. Some have responded more positively than others. We've seen some changes at the top of our regulators. If you take, for example, the Bank of England that does the prudential regulation for financial services, we've delayed the implementation of Basel III for a year. I think that is a practical, pragmatic thing that regulators are doing in the UK, recognising that growth really matters. Just today, after I said we need to go further and faster, we've announced these reforms around the judicial review process. Yesterday, our Environment Secretary announced the creation of a nature restoration fund to unlock housing development. So instead of having to make adaptations on each site, you can pay into a fund that makes it nature positive, but not necessarily on that site. That will unlock immediately about 150 housing developments that otherwise were stuck in the system. So already, since I've said further and faster, right across government, because it's not just the role of the Chancellor or the Treasury to deliver growth, it's got to be right across government. So whether it is the housing department, the environment department, or the business department, those are just three examples this week alone on what we're doing to grow the economy.
And is there any danger that, we had the departure of the CMA chair, that gives the impression that perhaps businesses won't be challenged?
Well, the regulator's still independent, but I believe, and this government believes, that regulators could do more to pay attention to growth and not just risk, and that the balance has moved too far in one direction and needs redressing. As I say, a number of the regulators we feel are stepping up to that plate. I changed the remit letters to the financial services regulators in November last year, and I'm already seeing us changing the way that they think about things. That's really good. But when this government says growth is the number one mission, that's also got to apply to our regulators.
And in one sector specifically, would the banking sector, would you support further consolidation if that was to create a bank that would challenge the big US banks who are obviously very present here in Davos?
Well, we would look at any plans around mergers. The big capital markets thing that we're working on right now is consolidation of our pensions system to create more mega funds to help our startup and scale up businesses grow and achieve scale in Britain.
So March 26th is an important date, Alex, right?
Yes, it's an important date. The Independent Office of Budget Responsibility will give its verdict that day, which the government will then respond to. Mm-hmm. It will have an idea of what measures it will have to take or what changes it might have to take.
Yeah, to meet their own fiscal rules, right? To meet the government's own fiscal rules.
Exactly, yeah.
I mean, it's interesting to me, like, she's obviously laid these rules out for a reason, right? That they want to build up credibility with the market, but they do create their own momentum, don't they? Like, they do mean she's boxed in and she'll have to act if the OBR comes out with a sort of a kind of a more jaundiced view of how things are looking. Yeah,
this government has been consistently saying they will stick within their own rules, as you say, which makes it very difficult for them politically to go do otherwise.
I mean, she certainly means business on making regulation more practical, right? Like, we saw the departure of the UK antitrust regulator this week.
Yeah, there's been a change at the top of the CMA, and I think it's very clear from the Chancellor that she saw that change as necessary, and it's been very much part of the message that they've been getting across about the need for regulators to promote growth or not stand in the way of growth, which is growth is the buzzword. Mm-hmm.
It's the mantra.
It's very much the mantra.
Yeah. I mean, that move towards deregulation, it's happening elsewhere. We certainly are seeing that in the US. But Alex, you experienced Britain's light touch financial regulation when you ran coverage of the financial services sector for Reuters. Like, it presaged the global financial crash. There are risks, aren't they, inherent in all of this?
Well, nobody's saying light touch regulation in these corridors around Davos, and it's not something that's really been mentioned at this stage. It would take a lot to roll things back since the regulations that were put in place during the financial crisis or following the financial crisis. who knows?
And she's also talked about the move to get more infrastructure projects, investments in AI. I mean, is the UK a kind of an alluring spot for tech companies to invest in?
Well, it has been a place where, you've seen Facebook and others put a big headquarters in London, and they're big players in the country. And obviously, like other countries, in terms of attracting skilled jobs, they're obviously at the forefront of that. And given everybody, well, here you see it in Davos, the fascination with AI, both as an opportunity and as potentially as a threat. Clearly, that any measures that the government in the UK can take to give themselves an advantage potentially over other neighbours or European neighbours to get that kind of investment is going to be important.
I mean, bottom line, if the UK can't get growth motoring, where does that leave it and Reeves? Will she have to cut taxes or raise spending? Has she given an indication of which path she may go down?
No, we really haven't had any indication of that. I mean, as you'll again hear in the brief interview that we had today, the message is that she's very much on message.
Alex, thank you so much.
Oh, it's been an absolute pleasure. I've loved it.
A big thank you to Alex and everyone covering Davos for Reuters. I hope you all get to relax with some fondue and a beer this weekend. There's a newsletter to accompany this show. There's a sign-up link in the description of today's pod. Sound design, composition and engineering on this episode was by Josh Summer. Our podcast team includes Sharon Reich-Garson, Kim Vanell, Tara Oakes, Gail Issa, Jonah Green, David Spencer and Christopher Walljasper. Our executive producer is Leela de Kretzer. Remember, for all your daily news, check out our weekday show, Reuters World News. You can catch it on the Reuters app or wherever you listen to your podcasts.